everyone. We're recording. Good morning. So I am Ariel Zhang. I am the Chief Strategy Officer here at the Animal Foundation in Las Vegas, Nevada. I am super excited to be co-hosting today with Bobby Mann. And so Bobby, I will kick it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Not only is she co-hosting, she is going to be our presenter of the day, which we'll get into her amazing topic a little later on. But I want to toss it over to my other dear friend, Donnell Randolph, to get us kicked off with the question of the day for today.
All right, I got this question all last week for some reason, and it kind of ticked me off, but it made me think about it this morning. Like, what brings us to work every day? Why are we here? What gets us going to come back for another day if you had especially a bad day yesterday?
Yeah, at first I thought you meant literally, so I was going to say Wi-Fi for me most of the time, but we're getting real spiritual about this. I'm going to have to marinate on that one for a little bit. Collaboration, I love that one from Allison. But if folks want to start dropping them into the chat, we'd love to see your thoughts. Kristen, I love your message about hope. If you don't mind, would you unshare and just like tell us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Basically, we all have bad days, right? I mean, today could be a bad day, but there's hope that tomorrow is going to be even better. And if I leave with that, work every day with that attitude, then I'm ready for the next day. I don't come in as exhausted. I don't come in as disillusioned or disheartened. I come in ready to tackle whatever gets thrown my way. It doesn't mean that that next day runs perfectly, but at least I have that hope coming in that everything's going to be wonderful and we're going to have a great day, and we start that day off on a positive rather than a negative.
Well, you are getting lots of positive reactions in the chat from that. I also, Corey, I think something that I love about your comment is you say, give back and helping animals and people. Could you talk about the people part of this and what part of helping people you love the most, Corey?
I think for those of us they're kind of in this world, I mean, it's of course it's about the animals, but it's also about the people, because knowing that you've helped someone to be able to get a dog that they're going to have for the rest of that dog's life, and that dog is going to add so much to their world and their stressfulness and everything else that goes along with it. I mean, it's just gratifying knowing that not only are you helping the animals, but you're helping these people that are going to have these animals, and it's just it's a gratifying feeling to know that hey, it's not just all about the animals. You're also helping people.
It is not all about the animals, and you're also helping people. Quote that, folks. Corey, would you mind telling people where you're from and what you do?
I kind of wear a few different hats. I'm in Wimberley, Texas, which is just outside southwest of Austin. And the group I'm associated with is Wimberley Adoption Group, or WAG. And I'm the fundraising chair and on the board of directors for WAG. And then I wear a number of different hats and do a lot of marketing and event work for other organizations as well. But WAG's kind of my main animal organization that I'm tied to.
Well, we appreciate you being here. And earlier, folks, if you weren't on the call, we asked Corey what magical superpower treat did his photographer have to have all of those dogs look at the camera at once. And he told us it was a very special squeaker toy. Let's keep this going for a little bit. Tracy, I love your organization personally. And for folks that don't know your organization, would you mind unmuting and sharing a little bit about what you do and why you love it?
Hi, sorry for the delay. I'm already sitting here with a newborn too. So our organization is a bit of a safety net, and it removes barriers for families that are seeking services such as healthcare or drug rehab, or families who really need to find some pet-friendly housing and they just aren't able to find it because they're trying to find it while they're constantly accompanied by their animals. And the client that we met with yesterday, she had been trying to find pet-friendly housing for months, and her cat had been living with her in her two-door sports car, and she was just doing the best that she could for her cat. And this wonderful, loving cat, when I took him to his foster home yesterday, the poor guy had urine on him because he'd been living in a kennel and he had some muscle atrophy, and his owner was apologetic. And I said, you know, just reaching out for help, I know how much courage that takes, and that's why we're here. And his foster home was just so happy to provide him some love and a soft place to land so that his mom could focus on getting the help that she needs. And I think one thing that the pandemic has shown us is that this could happen to any of us. It was one incident that happened to this particular client. And it was just a snowball effect, and she really, really needed that support so that she wouldn't have to be separated permanently from her family member. And so I'm very passionate about this work. I cry every week in a good way because I know that we're making a difference and we're keeping families together. Families shouldn't have to be permanently separated for a temporary situation.
Keeping families together. Tracy, if you don't mind, please drop the link to your organization in the chat. I'm sure people will love to check it out. I think the thing that resonated with me the most about what you said was the person with the two-door sports car. Because when I was working the front counter of an animal shelter and oftentimes supporting food bank programs or community support programs, on my toughest days where I was just tired, exhausted, was suffering from a lot of compassion fatigue, trying to find my resilience, I would find my head in a place of judgment. Oftentimes people would walk through the doors with nicer shoes than what I was wearing, a nicer car than what I was driving. And I would question them and say, are they taking advantage of these services? And it wasn't until I was able to get away from the work for a little bit, recharge my battery, was the moment that I absolutely realized that we never know the path that people are walking, and that it's our job to meet them where they are. And Tracy, I appreciate you and honor you for making that connection for us today.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I keep in mind too with my clients is just because they could afford that car at one time doesn't mean that they could go out and purchase it again now. I mean, look at the housing crisis right now. The house that I'm living in was purchased for $385 a few years back. Now it's valued at 1.1 million. I couldn't buy that house. And so you look at these things. Yeah, she could afford that car a few years ago, but several things have happened since then. And she has to hold on to that asset because that's now her transportation, her home, her lifeline, her everything. And so there's absolutely no judgment ever with any of our clients. I'm just in awe of whenever they have the courage and the strength and the vulnerability to reach out for help.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Well, to circle this back full circle, Donnell, we want to come back to you and hear what keeps you coming to work every day, sir.
I have to say, saying yes. When people are coming in, need services for their animals, and they're like, this is their last, they don't want to surrender. So what they're doing is saying, hey, I want to keep my animal, but I need some help. Can we help? And I love being able to say yes. That keeps me recharged, makes me smile, makes me like, okay, I can help you out with this. Do you need anything else? Just so you keep your animal, so we're not adding to another cage, but we're also helping the people and their animal.
Donnell, I love it. So I have one last question for you, because although you are a boss, you're not the boss, right? You have a boss. There is a manager at your shelter. And so, you don't necessarily have the power in your position to be the person that gets to decide what the budget looks like and all of these things. But it sounds like you get to say yes all the time. So can you talk about your organization's culture and how you got to a place where someone like you can say yes?
Sure. When we had in Oakland, we had a new group of new bosses come in around the same time I did. And I was doing my job as transfer, and I was like, I would like some more work. I need something else to do. Transfer isn't taking up all my time just because we have everything's happening different times. I need something else. So she's like, okay, we want to join Haas. What do you think about joining Haas? And look at, all their stuff and come back to me. And then so after she learned what my likes are, what I want to do, what my future looks like, she was like, okay, I want to give you, the power to be able to say yes. But I want you to come up with ground rules on what we can say yes to, what we can't say yes to, but also talking to the vet and other people, stakeholders in the company. So that's how I was able to do what I'm doing now. So
I love it. And the fact that you're talking about building infrastructure around how to say yes and building systems around how to say yes, I think is going to tie perfectly into our conversation later that Ariel is going to be talking about just strategic planning. But before we get to that, there's a couple things that we want to do. If you are new to this call and it is your first time, we'd love for you to say hello in the chat. So please introduce yourself and the organization that you're with. And we're also going to open up the floor for national updates. So if you're a national organization, now is the time.
All right, I guess I will start us off. Good morning, everyone. It's Bethany from Best Friends. How's it going? A couple of things to share with you guys quickly today. Reminder, we've got our town hall on transparency this Thursday at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. Central Time. So please join for that. Additionally, there's a Leading Through Change webinar coming up. I'll put the registrations in the chat. And then lastly, we are redoing our shelter and rescue industry survey. And so we would love for anyone and everyone to take this. It's less than 8 minutes to complete it. And it gives us a snapshot on a couple of different things. How are your guys' operations in terms of pre-COVID, post-COVID, whatever we're calling right now in life? What's staffing looking like? And how are your adoptions and capacity? So I will pop all of those in the chat.
Thanks, Bethany.
Hi, this is Dr. Sheila Sigerson. Sorry for the noisy dogs from Maddie's Funds. Speaking on behalf of the Haas Behavior Job Alike, just want to invite everyone to our next meeting, which is on Thursday, March 31st at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern Time, where we will be talking about post-adoption behavior follow-up. And we have a great group of speakers. Hope you all can join us. I'll put the link in the chat.
Thanks, Dr. Segerson. Before we keep moving, I'm going to pick on someone that is new. Nora, welcome to the call. We'd love for you to unmute and introduce yourself to the rest of the group, if you don't mind.
Hi, hi everyone. I'm Nora with Snake River Animal Shelter. We are a nonprofit animal shelter in Eastern Idaho, one of the only nonprofit shelters in the region. I work in development, so mainly fundraising, and I'm happy to be here and here get new ideas from all around and all these different initiatives.
Well, welcome, Nora. Would you tell us something that you love about your job or the work that you do?
I love that I'm able to connect with people who are passionate about animals. And those are, of course, our staff, our volunteers, but also our supporters, our donors, who really believe I'm sorry, I have a cold, so apologize my voice. Yes, who really want to help homeless animals and try new ways to find solutions to the issue.
Well, thank you so much, Nora, for being here, and we hope that you can join us for many more weeks in the future.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so let's get into it. So I'm really excited because one of the things that we've been trying to be more intentional about on these calls as well is really slowing down and making sure that you're able to really invest into specific topics. So although oftentimes we'll have two topics, you're going to see a lot of upcoming meetings where you're going to see one major topic where we're going to be able to unpack it and spend a little more time. This week, we're going to be talking with Ariel Zhang in strategic planning and just making sure that you're mapping with inclusive strategies. So I'm going to have her hop into that in just a second, but also a huge promotion for next week. We are going to have an amazing panel of folks that are going to be doing a round 2 of a conversation about removing barriers to adoption. We previously hosted a webinar on this topic, and we're going to be doing a round 2 so people can ask more questions. I will be sharing the link to the webinar in the chat. But before we get to that, I'm going to toss it back over to my co-host, Ariel, to get into her presentation.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So I am going to share my screen. Okay. Can we all see this? Okay, awesome. Oh, giving everyone a preview. Okay, so hi everyone. So yeah, I am Ariel Zhang again. I am the Chief Strategy Officer here at the Animal Foundation located in Las Vegas, Nevada. So for those of you that don't know about me, I joined the industry only a year and a half ago. I came from the for-profit side, leading large global strategic initiatives, both in-house and in consulting. And I wanted to work in nonprofits. And when I was having conversations with somebody else from animal welfare, they were talking about this shift in the industry from going within our shelters and really focusing on just best practices in the shelter to focusing on this community movement. And that's what really intrigued me. And when Donnell asked, what brings me to work every day, I think, from my perspective, it's all the new complexities and keeping my brain working with all of this kind of like new frontier. And so then when I was speaking with my organization, they were at the end of Mission Possible 2020, which was the goal of achieving zero euthanasia of healthy and treatable. And we were starting to have a strategic planning conversation about what is next. And again, this idea of community got brought up, and it was super interesting, but it was super broad. And I think that sometimes when we're having these conversations, it can feel like this frontier is really is anything kind of goes. And hopefully today I can give you guys some framework about how to really tackle this during your strategic planning process, and really anytime you guys are implementing a new program. So this is the process that we took. And really the idea of this is if we're going to start talking about community, there are many more competing factors that now we have to face. It's not just, best practices in our shelters. It's kind of a real new horizon. And so it's really important for us to understand what does that horizon look like for the people that we're going to be serving. And so we started in this kind of discovery phase that I'll talk a little bit more about, and it's talking about defining our future and understanding our future, understanding the trends and patterns that really drive our next phase, and then exploring what those drivers, the impact of those drivers on your individual organizations, and then listing out from those drivers the probability and then impact to understand what you should prioritize and focus on. So then after we've understood this landscape, we went deeper into segmentation by building out personas. And then that's ultimately how we created our strategic plan. So when we talk about figuring out our future, it feels kind of a bit like magic 8-ball-y or like tarot card reading, and kind of like this mystical idea, but it's really not. And so there's this practice of futures. And what futures is scanning the horizon for these quote nodes. And you can think of them as trends that you're seeing today. And by being aware of these trends, you can kind of figure out what the future could look like. So COVID is a really great example. We couldn't have predicted COVID. We couldn't have said, there will be a global pandemic in 2019, and this is exactly what it's going to look like. But we probably could have figured out that based on trends that were happening in Asia, that masking was a practice that we might socially accept one day. That social distancing during flu season might be something that we accept one day. Based on history, we know that these kinds of pandemics or major outbreaks of disease is cyclical, and it happens every once in a while, probably in our lifetimes. We haven't seen it in the way that COVID-19 impacted us, but certainly we've been exposed to it various ways with different, the mad cow disease or SARS or, things like that in the past. So that can make us aware of what possibly could have happened with COVID. And so it's really important to understand these possibilities so that then we can prepare our business. So by creating models and scenarios, we can also figure out what to do about them, right? There's so much that's happening every day, and there's so much noise that's happening every day. How are we going to sort all of that out to really make business decisions? How are we going to invest our resources, whether it's the time of our staff or dollars that we're fundraising, to build programs that are going to stay sustainable and that really have an impact, a lasting impact in our communities, and making sure that we're not having any waste. And lastly, we can really be proactive rather than reactive, right? Because we can identify things that might happen in the future, and instead of saying, oh no, it's happening right now, we can really position ourselves in a position of strength so that we can be prepared. So I think the key here is, we can't predict the future. We don't have a magic 8-ball, and we don't have, tarot cards for the future. But if we understand what the possibilities could be, we can map it and then shape the future in a way that we want it to be. So I don't know how to get the chat going, or I can't figure out how to pop you guys back out. But I would love to hear if somebody has heard of a 15-minute city and if people know what that means. Maybe Bobby, you can tell me what people say in the chat.
I'm happy to keep an eye on it for you.
So put in the chat if you've heard of a 15-minute city and you know what that means. Is that a lot of yeses, a lot of no's?
So far, we got a never heard of it from Peter Wolf.
Okay. Bobby, have you heard of a 15-minute city?
I have not, but I'm really excited for it.
So 15-minute cities, basically, the idea came out a couple years ago, and it was really to combat climate change. And so basically the idea of a 15-minute city, and what we're already starting to see this actually, is that you can have access to everything that you need from a day-to-day basis in 15 minutes. And so in Seoul, Korea, they're actually building a 10-minute city. So anything from being intentional about building this kind of ecosystem, or I know I used to live in St. Louis, and they were starting to have shared workspaces, things like that. And so basically within 15 minutes, you have access to restaurants, culture, your work, hospitals, anything that you would need in your daily life, grocery stores, would be within 15 minutes, so that we wouldn't have to drive and create all of this pollution and really have a way to combat climate change. And so then the question is, if we have 15-minute cities, how does that change people's behavior when they view convenience? And how do we position our products and services so that we can ensure that we're going to be a part of that movement when it comes to the forefront? Or how does that change pet ownership? And how does that make us aware of the practices that people are adopting when they're moving into these 10-minute cities? Another great example of how things can impact us is climate change. So here in Las Vegas, given that we live in the desert, we're seeing real effects of climate change, not just in hearing about the forest fires in our neighboring California, but also in longer kitten seasons. So how are we going to prepare ourselves if kitten season is year-round instead of just in the summer? What does that look like? The other day, I was having conversations with Steve Kaufman from PetSmart Charities, and we were talking about the economy, and we were talking about gas prices going up. And so that's quite a hot topic right now, understandably so. But when we see things like gas prices, and I would even argue that inflation is a part of this too, people are feeling instability in their own personal finances. And during that time, we see a decrease in adoptions, because if you feel instability in your own personal life, you're not trying to add another mouth to feed. So how are we going to deal with that going into summer? We've seen the rise of QR codes. If you go to a restaurant now, I feel like you can't go without seeing a QR code. So then the question is, how are we going to leverage that technology in animal welfare and for our organizations? Because this idea of technology has opened up for us. A couple years ago, I think if people were like, oh yeah, scan a QR code, they'd be like, what's a QR code? But now everyone pretty much knows what a QR code is. Broadly, there's this idea of global citizenship. So we might be, personally, I'm Canadian, but you might feel like, you live in the United States, you're American, but a lot of people identify with things that are going outside of their own countries now. They feel like a citizen of the world and rather than of their own country. And so I think that that's another frontier for us to consider when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to the way that we speak about our practices, the way that we understand the concepts of other cultures, especially as we're seeing rise in immigration. So all of these different trends are things that we can pay attention to, right? So basically you can think about it in these 5 categories. And when you think about these trends, you can ask these questions that I have listed on the right here, right? What kind of expectations do we have in the past that we need to adjust now based on changing trends? How are the people that we're serving changing their needs and the way that they're communicating, whether that's the way that we communicate with them, whether that's from a programming perspective, whether that's the way that we fundraise with them, how is that changing? What are the threats and opportunities to the way that we currently operate? So for your organization to continue to operate and be sustainable, how is that going to change the way that you operate? So in COVID, during COVID times, we had to go to appointment only, and that could have changed the way that some people either functioned or even the possibility of their organization surviving that pandemic. So capabilities and programs, whether that's, technological or the way that, again, we have our programs, the way that we run our programs, the way that we communicate our programs, what kind of things need to change, and what kind of capabilities do we need to build and invest in. And really these 3 buckets of programs, operations, and funding is the way that we can think about these trends. And so I would love if we opened it up right now, because I would hate to speak at you for 40 minutes, to hear about trends that you're seeing in your local communities or that you're seeing on the news or when you guys are having conversations with your friends on the weekends. What kind of things are we seeing?
Ariel, and before we open, would you mind repeating the question one more time for folks that might just be listening into the call?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about these 5 factors, right? Social, economic, technological, environmental, and political, what kind of trends are you guys seeing on the news, in your local communities, that might impact the way that animal welfare needs to operate in the future when it comes to programs, operations, funding, just kind of those trends that you might be generally seeing? Like I was talking about earlier, 15-minute cities, climate change, increase in gas prices. What are y'all seeing?
Hi, Ariel. Thank you for this awesome conversation. I'm seeing in my community, like we have more housing development, but in planning commissions, they are definitely discussing like walkable cities. Mm-hmm. So that might mean accommodating a more dense population within a certain area, within certain zone, certain region. So we're looking at what is mixed use, residential, different types of zoning for housing. And with housing comes animals too. So not sure. And then you have to build the services around those as well. But I think there is an interest in not wanting to drive around as much in my community.
Which is awesome, because we're seeing higher rates of pet obesity, but potentially if people are walking around more and walking their animals more, then that can help that situation. And we can promote programs and marketing towards raising awareness if that's the lifestyle that people are living, right? Can we get one other example?
Looks like Albert, you have an example in the chat. Would you mind unmuting and sharing your example?
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys can hear me. I'm just on some earpods in a different location than normal.
You sound great. Also, Albert, would you mind introducing yourself and what organization you're with and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. I'm on the board of directors for a rescue society in Calgary, Alberta, Canada called Pause for Change. And I tend to be overseeing our entire cat program as well as the overall intake. And we partner with a bunch of First Nations and rural communities up in Alberta and BC, Canada. And one of the examples that I'm seeing recently, our intake just this spring intake requests have spiked dramatically. We're up probably about 250% off of our normal intake requests. And as a completely foster-based organization, it's hard for us to cope. But a lot of the intake requests that we're seeing are all economic drivers, families that are unable to afford the food for their pets and themselves. They're unable to pay for surgeries for spays and neuters, which then results in oopsie litters, and then a request for intake for litters of puppies. And I'm sure coming soon will be litters of kittens that will be coming with our more delayed kitten season than you guys down in the States.
Yeah, absolutely. We're also seeing that here in Las Vegas. And I think that, to your point, there are a lot of economic trends that inform those events. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great example. So I think that this is also a really great exercise that you can engage your boards, because typically the way that we did it was we have board members from Google and from a local telecommunications company. And so I think that those folks typically have access to research reports and other pieces of information and bring them in. It doesn't have to be animal welfare specific, because we're really just talking about these trends, right? And then it's our job as leaders in our organizations to translate those trends into animal welfare impacts. And so that's a great exercise for your board. And then once we understand the landscape of what could be happening in the future, those trends and the changes in behavior, then we can dive down deeper. So we did an exercise after we understood kind of the landscape of what was happening around us, around personas. Personas is it was traditionally used as like design thinking for technology builds, but I actually think that it's a great method to build our programs against, because it helps you understand your exact customer. So we kept talking about here in my organization about our customer and who do we serve. And I think that oftentimes in animal welfare, we talk about the community, but the community is really, really broad. And when we talk about the community as if it was an entirety, I think that there's a huge opportunity for us to miss the people that actually need our support and services. And so digging deeper into what does that community mean, who makes up that community, is really important. It's also an empathy exercise. To Bobby's point earlier about, we kind of, I think, can come from a place of judgment. By really putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, we're really going to think about what does their life look like, right? What do we really need to consider, so that when we're building our programs, that it's really functional for them and the most easy to obtain. A gap analysis is also a part of this, in the sense that we can ask ourselves, if their needs are A and we're doing B, then what is the difference between A and B, and what kind of functionality do we need to create so that we're really meeting the needs of our community and not having any of those gaps. And the last piece of this is really, it's a hypothesis and research. So we can think about personas as gathering data. And it's kind of because all of our programs are essentially experiments, right? We start with a hypothesis thinking, if we do this, it will solve this community need. And so we can collect the data around what do we think is the best approach, and then adjusting as we get new information. And what personas are not is a project plan. So really what we're trying to do when we do this exercise is we're trying to find information, and it's not a project plan. And what it's really not is solutioning. I think it's really easy for us to say, oh, it's a pet food pantry. That's what our community needs. But is it a pet food pantry? Are we trying to connect them to services so that they don't need a pet food pantry in the future? What does that look like? And really starting from a place of thinking about them and their needs, rather than going straight into functionality and programs, really gives us a moment to take a step back and making sure that we're solving the problem holistically, and really making sure that we're understanding the problem. So this is a template. It's not super exciting to look at, but the information that you gather is what's super interesting. So I think that we have in our organization, we used to talk a lot about the Hispanic population because we have a large immigrant population, mainly of Hispanic culture. And we used to talk about, oh, well, how do we retarget that population? And someone who works within our teams, she's the community outreach manager. She's from that community and she works with that community on a day-to-day basis, was like, Hispanic population, like that's not right. We should talk about the persona of abuela. And I loved it so much because she was absolutely correct. Talking about abuela versus someone who might be first or even second generation, who was born in the US and might have adopted those kind of cultural norms and certainly languages, are very different populations. And the people who actually need our products and services are not that younger generation. It tends to be abuela. So when we talk about where is abuela located, she's not on the internet. She typically has low technology experience. So marketing to her on our website about our services for surrender intervention and shelter diversion is not helpful to her because she's not going to be there. Perhaps being at the supermarket is more appropriate for her from a location perspective. Also, a huge piece that we talk about is motivations and influences. She's motivated by her religion. It's quite a huge part of her life. And so if we are to go into her community, we look nothing like her, we don't speak the language, and we're like, hey, come to us for, pet food pantry. That's great. Maybe she'll be open to that. But in a vulnerable situation, we don't have that relationship. And so a different way to approach that is to engage a church leader. If we know that religion is important to her, then perhaps when we're deploying a new program, we want to go to a church leader and say, hey, how is it best for us to communicate this new program that we have? What kind of language should we be using? And can you help us promote those kinds of programs? Because that's ultimately how we're going to get to that point. Who has the relationship? Who has influences over her life that she trusts is an important perspective to think about rather than us going in and with all good intentions, absolutely. And the last piece of this is, who are you going to bring to the table to have these conversations, right? If our community outreach manager didn't step up and say, wait, guys, this is not the way to implement, then we wouldn't have known any better, right? We would have thought, there's a need for pet food pantry because people are surrendering their animals, but we wouldn't have an understanding of who are those people, what motivates them to want to come to us, who has the trust, what kind of needs and wants and expectations is that person going to have? Because if we just say, hey, come to us for pet food pantry, but then we find out that transportation is a huge need, then we're also not going to get our programs to that end user, right? If our frustrations and challenges are that, everything's on an app and we know based off of our data that she doesn't even have access to the internet, then that's not going to be helpful. If her frustration is that everything's in English and she doesn't speak English, then putting information on a flyer in English isn't going to help her. So taking this exercise and really digging down into who is the community, what are the segmentations of our community is really important.
I'm literally about to flip my laptop over in excitement because I have never heard something so real. I just want to pause for a sec so I can read you some of the comments. Loving this. Yes. Love this example of personas versus community. Peter Wolf says, literally meeting people where they are. Yeah. Caitlin, would you mind unmuting and sharing what you said? Because I think that's also very important.
Sure. Sorry. Speaking of my challenges, I'm at home with my elderly dad. So the TV is really loud in the background. But yeah, I have seen personas used before for marketing purposes. And this was just such a great explanation of how to segment appropriately. And it immediately made me go to that place of this could be so useful for marketing and communications.
Awesome. I'm really glad. And actually, that's the end of my presentation. I actually really would love to open it up for further conversations about what kind of, I'm going to stop sharing. And I can always go back to a slide, but I would actually really love to have a conversation about the personas in your community, trends that we're seeing, and kind of open it up. I think the last piece of this is really just, again, anything that we talked about today can be used from whenever you're building a program. It doesn't have to just be when you're doing strategic planning. I know that strategic planning happens less frequently, but I think, breaking it down, your trends, your personas into short term, so in the next year, and then 3 to 5 years from a strategic planning process, and then also a 10-year perspective. I know that on from now until 10 years, a lot of things can change, but if we're not building investments now, then in 10 years, we're going to be obsolete, right? So I think having that long-term forecast is really important. But I would love to open it up for, what we're seeing in our communities and personas, and open it up for conversation.
Well, there's two things that I'm going to be thinking about. One is abuela, and two is oopsie litters, right, Peter? Like, I feel like that is such strong branding, because when we talk about like responsible versus irresponsible pet ownership and all of this language, I feel like oopsie litters is a really safe conversation to have with people.
Yeah, I've already planned to take the rest of the day off to design a T-shirt all about oopsie litters. Like I don't know what it's going to look like yet, but yeah, no, this is absolutely amazing. For the first time in a long time, I actually wish I was still teaching the graduate course in design thinking, so that I could have Ariel speak to the students about, like, people they would hear design thinking and they think like, oh, that's like designing the next iPhone or signage in an airport or something, which it is. But the point I always try to emphasize was it's everything. It's the shelter interaction. It's everything that we do. Like, you can't find something design thinking doesn't apply to. And I'm actually looking, like, I pulled a book off my shelf. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna copy this chapter and send it to Ariel, because it's very relevant to what you just showed us. And I think the response in the chat kind of echoes, like, oh, it's not just the guy who used to teach the design thinking course who gets excited about this or whatever. Like, it resonates so strongly with everyone. And I think it's easy to, I use this sort of framework to reverse engineer stuff. Like, when something's not working, you can kind of diagnose it and say, like, oh, this is because, like, this abuela we thought we were building it for abuela. And you look at what you actually did and you're like, oh, she doesn't care about this, or she doesn't see it where she goes in her day-to-day or whatever. So again, really, really very, very cool. So glad to see this. Even if it's 8 o'clock on a Monday, I still get up for these things.
Peter, I would love to read that chapter, and thank you so much for the kind words. And yeah, I hope that people are, I know it's 8 a.m. and we're talking about, like, yeah, what could happen in 10 years, but I hope that this gets people excited. I know that it gets me excited to come to work.
Yeah, I think likewise. And Peter, something else that you brought up in the chat that I thought was really interesting is when we were having the conversation about QR codes, right? And you said, QR codes were basically gone before COVID hit, but I think there's a really important factor in there that allowed for their success, and that was removing a barrier, right? So before, when QR codes started, you actually had to download an app onto your phone in order to be able to read the QR code. What Android and Apple allowed to happen is that QR codes now, all you have to do is open up your camera, right? So for all of you, if you're sitting at a restaurant and you sat down and the folks are like, hey, we don't have menus, but here, just scan this thing. But before you do, go to your phone, figure out what your iCloud login is, log in, download this app, open the app, then scan this thing, and then you have your menu. I would be like, I ain't even hungry no more. Like, this is too much, right? So I think that translates so well to the work we're doing in even removing barriers to adoption, right? So, like, how are people getting to you? How are you allowing them to meet with animals? What are the requirements, right? Like, we're talking about 15-minute cities, and we're still over here talking about 8-foot fences, So I think there's a lot that we can take from this conversation. But Ariel, I wanted to toss it back to you and see just where you would like to drive this.
I think that, when I joined animal welfare, the reason why I joined was because I felt like animal welfare is at the center of everything, right? We touch so many different causes. We touch housing insecurity, food insecurity, healthcare, because if an owner gets sick, animal ends up at the shelter as a confiscate, or at least it does in Vegas. If, you know, and if a person loses their job, we might see that animal. There's so many ways that we touch those causes. And so I think that if we're going to go into this next step of community, we have to really start thinking that way, because our best practices really worked for us in the shelter, right? We have people who are animal welfare people in the shelter. We have people who care about disease control at the shelter. When we start looking beyond our shelter walls, we're competing with so many other priorities. And so for our messages to be heard, for our, and for even when we build a program to help the community, that community is like, I have so many people trying to talk to me. Even if you have good intentions, it's kind of noise. So we have to really get good and really disciplined about how we're going to speak to them. What exactly is our target market? What exactly are we going to do to make sure that those programs are successful and efficient? And of course, we all have resources, right? We have finite resources. So we want to make sure that we're building programs that are sustainable and the best use of our resources. And so I think that this is a start to a conversation of how do we need to shift the way that we're working now that we're looking beyond our shelter walls.
I love that. Is there another, I love the example that you used about Ebola, but do you have another example at your organization when you looked at the work through personas that it really shifted the way that you were thinking or doing the work?
Yeah, so we also started talking about college students because we know that this like Gen Z population, which is roughly in college or maybe starting their careers, they're going to have the next phase of pet ownership. And then also they're going to be more, they have the best opportunity to be engaged. So we're starting to see a shift from like a funding perspective. We have our grantors, which we hope never go away, but we also are starting to shift the way that we're seeing fundraising. So we, from these like large donors to kind of more, the possibility at least of more individual donors. So, and then obviously though that population tends to be more technologically advanced. So when we looked at our website, for example, if you haven't looked at the Google Analytics of your website, you should do that soon because it tells you exactly what we're talking about here. What is the age group that's coming to your website? What are the pages that they're looking at? What is sometimes even their socioeconomic status? What are their affinity groups? And so then you can look at from that perspective of who is coming to you and either build that website towards that market or decide, ooh, that's not who we were trying to target, and then figure out how you're going to target the population you're actually trying to target. So that's one thing that we also looked at is just the information from like a Google Analytics perspective of who was coming to us virtually.
I love it. Jesse, I want to call on you from SIXA. One, so cool that you have an OOPS program. Just a consumer lens on that with my ADD attention span that I have. I clicked on it and read oops, and I was like, shit, this is a dead link. I went through the wrong place. So just some thought, but I want to hear about what you said in your comments in the chat.
Yes, briefly, the OOPS program, we're working on updating our website. So that link is super old. That was probably created 10 years ago. So the program is cool. The websites for it is terrible. So I hear you. Yeah, so just thinking about the personas and you know that we've had to change our thinking a little bit and in terms of thinking more into the future, right? And the segments of the population. You know, we're in a location where we're right along the highway. We're very visible in terms of our adoption center, but we're not very visible or even necessarily accessible to our other clients in our help center and kind of community resource center, where we offer a safe pets program, a pet food pantry. You know, we have an access to care veterinary clinic. So we've really had to consider transportation in our clients, and we can have all the best services in the world, but if people can't reach them. So, you know, we have a temporary care program for owners in crisis called our Safe Pets program. And sometimes we have to make people 3 appointments before we can finally get them here. So finding them transportation, networking to find that transportation has been really important. We've always had a low-cost veterinary clinic for things like spay, neuter, and a wellness program. But last year we started doing an access to care offsite clinic. So our goal is, you know, 9 or 10 times this year, we're taking that clinic offsite and targeting places in veterinary deserts and people who have transportation issues. So For us, the transportation piece has been huge, and figuring out how to get people to our facility or how to get our services outside of our facility to the people who need them the most.
Thank you so much. I also just want to pause and hold space for a second and reflect on something that I just said, and just do some self-correction. So although I have a short attention span, and although I am moving very quickly, I am not someone who has been diagnosed with ADD. And by using that language, I may have offended or triggered someone that is dealing with that situation. So I just wanted to personally just slow down and apologize, and just take that as a learning experience, and to make sure I'm always mindful of the words that I use. So for anyone that might have been triggered or offended by that, I do apologize. And Caitlin, I would love to come over to you and have you talk about what you just put in the chat as well.
Thanks, Bobby. I found a quieter spot. So I think what struck me when you were talking earlier, Ariel, about your abuela profile, and also when you were speaking about the college students, is just that you, by being really thoughtful about how you want to work with those segments of your community and your audiences, essentially, you have, what strikes me is that you've been able to do that without incidentally kind of falling into some of the traps of like stereotyping that group, or generalizing too much about a certain group within your community. And I think it's a delicate balance sometimes when you're working with personas. And I really appreciate how you've done that. So I don't know, just thoughtfully and delicately.
Thank you. I think that there's also, this is the huge key here, is to bring people that can speak about those segments authentically, and making sure that the right people are at the table when you have those conversations. Because I think that really helps. We're not going to make assumptions. We're going to let people that and really get a wide set of that audience, right? But making sure that we're engaging those people is key here. I'm also going to throw my email. I'm not good about this, but I'm going to throw my email into the chat, so that if anybody wants to bounce things off, or have any questions, or if I can, send any templates or anything, feel free to reach out.
Amazing. So Ariel, I know when you and I talked, we said our goal was to give people a little bit of time back, hopefully at the end, to get into their week. But is there anything that you wanted to say in closing before we send it over to Donnell to close us out for the day?
I am not going to take any space from Donnell. I think Donnell's wonderful, and I've taken up all of the space. So Donnell, bring us home.
Thanks, Ariel. You gave me a lot to think about for my community programs, and how in the future I want to move forward with bringing more targeting different groups to be able to come to the clinics and also assist in the clinic. So I really appreciate that. All right, guys, we always take a step back, but I think this week we should try to take a big step forward, because we all deserve it. And I hope you guys have a nice week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.